Good evening, everyone. Distinguished guests, members of the Council, members of the public in the gallery and everyone watching on webcast, please be seated. This evening we will be beginning with an extraordinary Council meeting which has been called in the wake of the tragic tram disaster that occurred on the 9th of November. Chief Executive, can you please advise those attending of the arrangements for this evening?
Councillors, guests, officers and members of the public are advised in the in the event of the fire alarm sounding, please leave the Town Hall as indicated by Council staff and congregate in Queen's Gardens until advised by Council staff that it is safe to return. In order for members to be heard in the chamber and public gallery, and for those watching via webcast, councillors are reminded to switch their microphones on when speaking and to switch them off at all other times. Thanks, Steve. Councillors, officers and members of the public are reminded to leave the meeting should you wish to make or receive a telephone call. With this exception, you are able to record the meeting if you wish, but please refrain from taking photos of people in the public gallery.
Thank you. As everyone is aware, on the morning of Wednesday, the 9th of November, people across Croydon woke to the dreadful news there had been a tragic tram incident on the 6:07 a.m. tram running from New Addington to Wimbledon. As the details of the accident began to emerge, the scale of the tragedy sadly became clear. 7 people lost their lives on the derailed tram that morning, 5 of whom were residents of New Addington, and a great many more people were taken to hospital, some of whom will have to live with their injuries for the rest of their lives. Those who lost their lives were Dane Chinnery, Donald Collett, Robert Huxley, Philip Logan, Dorota Rekiewicz, Philip Seary and Mark Smith. At this time, I ask that everyone present in the chamber joins me in a minute's silence as we remember those who lost their lives on November the 9th. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, John. The events of the 9th of November have had a great effect on many people across Croydon. In the days and weeks that have followed the tram derailing, I personally have found strength and comfort in how the community came together in the face of that tragedy. Members of the British Transport Police, London Fire Brigade, London Ambulance Service, the Metropolitan Police, Croydon University and St George's Hospitals, and staff from the Council worked tirelessly to rescue and treat people that were on the tram. Their work doubtlessly saved lives. Voluntary groups came to support those efforts, providing care and support, not just on November the 9th, but in the weeks that have followed. Local people living in the houses near to the scene came out and provided care and support too, from making warm drinks and providing food, to putting arms around the shoulders and helping the walking wounded. Those acts of care and kindness have been very deeply moving. We are privileged to have with us in the Chamber this evening representatives from some of the organisations that were critical in providing assistance and support at the time of the incident. For those of you with us, please accept my personal thanks and gratitude on behalf of the people of Croydon. The list of people and groups that volunteered their time and support to care for the victims of the tragedy is overwhelming. They include the British Red Cross, Victim Support, Railcare, the Samaritans, Addington Community Association, the Salvation Army, Off the Record, Centre of Change Project, St Mildred's Parish Church, Fennes Nursery, Co-op Food, faith representatives from New Addington and across Croydon, Pathfinders, Box Park, and almost 200 Croydon staff, including the Council's resilience team, emergency response volunteers, elected members and contracted partners. There are so many groups to name that I apologise if I've missed any. And thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you for the courage and care that you've shown to support all of those who've been affected by the tragedy. Your capacity for kindness has been a great source of inspiration at the saddest of times. Can I please call Councillor Tony Newman, Leader of the Council, to say a few words?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. 7 people were on that tram that early morning, heading out to work. They will never come home. Many others, in a phrase I heard too often in the hours that followed that crash, received life-changing injuries on that tram. And those and the amazing blue light first responders will need long-term support for what they witnessed that dreadful day. Mr Mayor, all of Croydon and all those families impacted need to know as soon as possible why that tram was travelling so fast, and to know that every possible measure has been taken to ensure what happened at Sandilands can never happen again. And it's right tonight, as well as remembering the victims, we pay tribute, as you have done, to the volunteers, the victim support groups, our own dedicated council staff, as the Evening Standard has tonight, in a full-page article, the staff at the hospitals, both here in Croydon and St George's in Tooting. On a personal level, visiting the crash site that afternoon with politicians from across this chamber and the GLA is a memory that I think will stick with all of us for the rest of our lives. We were also joined by the Mayor of London and one of his deputy mayors for transport, Val Shawcross. But it also served us to remind us that at times of tragedy, Croydon comes together. And that is what we've seen across Croydon in the last few weeks, from communities in New Addington to across the borough, to voluntary groups and others. People coming together, standing together, donating money together, standing in silence at Selhurst Park together to remember the victims across this borough, Croydon together to remember the victims and those that have suffered those dreadful long-term injuries. And if I can quote the Bishop of Croydon in some words, he said immediately following the tragedy, "It's how we remember the people that we've lost that is so important." And I echo that commitment, that we will remember those we have lost well. We will remember them as we are tonight. We will remember them in the months ahead, in the years ahead. But Croydon will never forget those that we have lost, and we will stand, as we have done, in solidarity to support those families who have many months and many years of challenges ahead in terms of the trauma suffered and the long-term injury. But if there is perhaps a crumb of comfort for those facing those appalling losses and injuries, especially as we run into the Christmas period, perhaps it is, and perhaps it will be in time to reflect that out of that tragedy, we really did see the best of the Croydon communities, the best of Croydon coming together, the best of the public services delivering on that day, and as you said, saving many other lives. It may not be much comfort now, but I hope it will be of comfort in the future to know that Croydon stands united, stands in solidarity, sharing that loss, sharing that grief, but, to quote the Bishop, ensuring that we remember well and remember forever. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Leader. I now call on Councillor Tim Pollard to speak.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for arranging this meeting. It's really important that, as a borough, we continue to come together to offer our support to the victims of this terrible accident and their families. Our thoughts are with those families struggling to come to terms with the loss of a loved one or perhaps with a life-changing injury. We also want to voice our thanks to the emergency services and all of those support workers who did such an incredible job under the most horrible of circumstances. Like everyone else, I was deeply shocked that such a thing could happen when I heard the news that awful Wednesday morning. Like many other residents, I used the tram to get backwards and forwards across the town. It's such a common sight around the town that we all take its availability and its safety for granted. What took place earlier this month, or last month, has demonstrated that we can and should never do that. I'm not going to comment on the circumstances of the crash or the interim report into its possible causes. The circumstances are being fully and comprehensively investigated, and I'm absolutely sure that this will uncover all of the facts and put forward any changes to processes that may be revealed as being necessary under the circumstances. In this chamber, we shouldn't say anything which may compromise the proper investigation of the facts, and I know nobody will do so. What we can do is talk about how the town responded that day and in the weeks afterwards, how the emergency services performed, how they were supported by volunteers and other public bodies, and how the town pulled together to help. All of this made me enormously proud to be a Croydonian, but also very sad. Staff from this council worked tirelessly to provide support to the families involved, particularly in the community hardest hit, that of New Addington and Fieldway. I'd like to particularly thank the resilience team, who I know worked around the clock in those first few days to ensure that the council was doing everything it possibly could to help. Further afield, the public got straight behind a fundraising campaign to provide an emergency fund to help victims and their families, and I'm sure that has been appreciated by all of those people trying to come to terms with this dark time. A few days after the crash, we had Remembrance Day and Remembrance Sunday. Always a solemn occasion, they were given extra poignancy this year by the much more raw sense of loss the whole town was feeling. Indeed, I was struck by some of the conversations I had over that weekend with people associated with the emergency services. Talking to the commander of the local Salvation Army, he mentioned in passing the number of teas and coffees they'd served to rescue workers over the 24 hours after the crash. And it's that sort of unsung heroism that we gather today to recognise and to give thanks for. When we think of a disaster such as this, it's easy to forget the number of things that need to happen behind the scenes to keep teams with the skills to save lives working continuously at the scene of the accident. To all of those people who did the unseen jobs outside of the limelight, the town gives you its grateful thanks. We're coming up to Christmas now, but for some families this year, Christmas will have a sense of loss. I hope those families can take at least a little comfort from knowing that all of our thoughts will be with them. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pollard. I now call on Councillor Carol Bonner to speak.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's an honour to be able to speak tonight so we can remember the individuals, families and communities whose lives were so tragically affected by the events of the 9th of November. I doubt any of us will forget how the events unfolded, from the initial reports that a tram had overturned to the terrible realisation that there had been loss of life as well as serious injuries. And then for me, learning that the tram had been travelling from New Addington and that it was very likely that some of the people I represent would be amongst the dead and injured, that I would know families whose lives had been changed forever. New Addington is a strong community that comes together in times of adversity. It is caring and compassionate towards those who are suffering. It's a testament to everyone that as soon as the enormity of what had happened became clear, that this wonderful community wanted to do what it could to support those who had been affected. When the council asked the ACA to open and become a welfare centre, they responded immediately and provided space on that first day for council safety officers to assist with helping those affected. Community members also pitched in to be a listening ear and offer tea and sympathy. Local shops provided drinks and food to support the welfare centre. Everyone wants to do something to help. I visited the ACA with Councillor Lewis that first evening and heard that a young man who had been injured had been referred back to the care of the NHS after suffering a head injury. The young man is actually the son of someone I know well. And later that evening, the wife of someone who was unaccounted for came in to seek help in tracing her husband. Very soon, New Addington, along with the rest of Croydon, was in mourning as the scale of the injuries and fatalities unfolded. New Addington responded in the way it always does. Very soon, everyone was offering help to anyone who had been affected, and many people were affected. There are many extended family networks, and in such a close-knit community, it's not surprising that just about everyone knew someone who had been on that tram. Very quickly, there was praise for the emergency services and a desire to reward them for their response in such difficult conditions. But even more remarkable was the offer by the fire crew from New Addington Fire Station to donate their wages for that morning. Above and beyond doesn't even come close. As councillors for New Addington and Fieldway, we wanted to say to those crews, on behalf of the wonderful people of New Addington, I want to say thank you. And it was humbling to speak to both ambulance and fire crews who attended on that fateful morning and who did their best to rescue and treat everyone on that tram. I also want to pay tribute to the response from our council and the voluntary services such as the Red Cross, the Samaritans, local churches and individuals from New Addington and beyond who were able to offer a listening ear as well as practical help and counselling. I can't begin to imagine what the families of the dead and injured are experiencing. But what I do know is that the family that is New Addington will be with them to support them every step of the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Councillor Steve O'Connell, I call on you to speak.
Mr Mayor, first of all, I'd like to thank you and the leader for enabling this debate tonight. It's really important that the council, Croydon's council, marks and remembers the victims and the events of that day. And I think it's absolutely appropriate that we have the opportunity to speak tonight in support across the chamber. We already heard at length the organisations that were there to support from the residents and from the voluntary sector. And I think that speaks volumes about Croydon. And I'd like to give some thanks also around that day. Particularly I'd like to mention the Mayor, Sadiq Khan. He came down that afternoon. Now, one would expect the Mayor of London to visit a critical site in our great city. But on that day, when we spoke to Sadiq, you could see he was of integrity and was really supportive of us. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to him, and I've spoken to him privately to thank him for that. I'd like to thank the Leader of the Council, Deputy. I'd like to thank Val Shawcross, who came along to support as well, Gavin Barwell, and others. But when we talked about the emergency services, many of those report to the Mayor of London, particularly TfL, and we saw that day Mike Brown, the Commissioner of TfL, Leon Daniels, who runs the overground services there, in support, but practical support as well to make sure there was sufficient resources. But of course, the most important people we should thank, and we are all doing so, is the residents of Croydon and the voluntary sector people that were there to support the victims, and many of those are from New Addington. They're here tonight, and we should recognise the support of that community. I recognise also the football club that quite properly marked it with a minute's silence, because we lost two of our own fans out of the seven, and that was marked properly by the football club. The Assembly has also marked it and debated, understanding that there are inquiries in course that will see their way through. We have also offered resource through the Mayor, if needs be, because clearly through the police, through Transport for London, there may be a facet that we can help in some possible way. If indeed it is also to ensure that people, after proper inquiry, ensure that the tram, which is still a jewel in Croydon's crown, continues to be safe. That's the most important thing. And I know that measures were taken immediately to give some comfort around that, but once the proper inquiries are carried out, we want to ensure that residents use the tram properly and it's seen as a safe mode of transport. Mr Mayor, that morning has been mentioned by the leader. People left home. Ungodly hour 6 o'clock it must have been, dark, November, miserable. They left home to support themselves and their families, to go to work, to doing the right thing. And as we've heard, 7 of them didn't come home, and there'd be an empty space in those houses at Christmas. And it is right that those families and communities are supported in the way that Croydon can do so. Again, I express my thanks through City Hall, through the GLA and through the Mayor for everything that's been done to support them, and we should always continue to do so. It shows Croydon at its best, and we must mark that and go forward appropriately. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connell. I now call on Councillor Simon Hall.
Mr. Mayor, New Addington is an incredibly strong community. Over the years, it has dealt with its share of challenges. The terrible tram incident of November the 9th has had a huge impact like no other that I can think of. And I think there are 2 key reasons for this. Firstly, there is the nature of our community. Ties of family and friendships, and being a town surrounded by fields, means that links between New Addington residents are often close and many. Given the number of New Addington people killed or injured, everyone knows someone who has been affected, directly or indirectly. For me, for example, one of my neighbour's sons was at school with Dane Chinnery, the 19-year-old who was killed, and my other neighbours are friends with the family of one of the victims. And close friends of mine were friends and work colleagues of bereaved families. I think also of the lady who broke down in tears on the Wednesday afternoon because she was normally on that tram with 2 work colleagues, but had to take the tram before because of an early work meeting and hadn't got news at that point of her colleagues. This makes the tragedy acutely personal to New Addington residents. The other reason that this is having a profound psychological impact is the relationship between New Addington and the tram. When the tram opened some 16 years ago, it gave a fast, reliable and easy-to-use link to Croydon and beyond, to an area that up to then was dependent on a couple of unreliable bus routes and a single road. The tram transformed people's lives, reducing the sense of isolation, improving lives, allowing more people to get jobs. The early morning trams always have plenty of passengers. For a while, I used to take the first tram of the day at 4:55 to get to work, and I would see many of the same faces each morning. Safe and reliable transport that everyone took as a given. On November the 9th, all of that changed. I want to pay tribute to the emergency services for the fantastic work they did. I know from speaking to some of those there how harrowing it was. Faced with the situation, the Council has done, I believe, an amazing job, working with voluntary sector organisations such as British Red Cross and with local voluntary organisations, rapid, flexible and responsive. After I spoke to Joe Negrini on the day of the incident about the need for somewhere for people to go for help and advice in New Addington, the ACA was opened up and the Welfare Centre was open within a couple of hours. The response from New Addington's voluntary organisations, too many to list here, has been exceptional. And the way that people have supported each other has been magnificent. Truly ordinary people doing an extraordinary job. Mr. Mayor, the tram incident has had a huge impact on New Addington. The community has responded to this incident with strength, love and determination. And I know that New Addington will continue to be that strong community in the months and years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. I now call on Councillor Helen Pollard to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the events unfolded on the 9th of November, I felt shock, disbelief and sorrow. I'm sure that many other residents felt the same. Worse still, this tragic event had taken place in my own ward of Fairfield. The tram had just come through the ward I had represented for 8 years, and it had originated in New Addington. I, along with colleagues from both sides of this chamber, have spent many evenings and weekends talking to the residents of New Addington and Fieldway over the years. This proud community had been hit hard. On the 10th of November, I attended the AGM of Whitgift Residents Association. This was the area where the tram crash had occurred, and those present clearly felt moved by the events of the previous day. The journey to the meeting was a sombre experience, as the main road was still closed. It seemed as if Croydon itself was in mourning, and in many ways it was. When something like this happens, people need information. Firstly, is there anything they can do to help? Then there are the practical realities of, can I get to work or go about my daily business? And finally, what can be done to stop anything like this happening again? I would like to praise the Council for its response to the crash. It was good to get the General Council briefings and see so much being done to support relatives. I would also like to recognise the response of the emergency services and show you the wonderful article in the Evening Standard today which recognises the work that they did and how wonderfully they responded. With any event like this, there will always be learning points. For example, as Ward Councillor, I was surprised to receive no specific information. Residents of Fairfield were directly impacted by the event, and whilst none were injured, it might have been helpful to have specific briefings to pass on to residents in the vicinity. Myself and my colleagues might have been able to provide some assistance. With our contacts in the area, we would have been able to mobilise additional support from local residents if that had been required. It's just a thought, and it might be helpful if there's an emergency in the future. Now the trams and the area has returned to semblance of normality. The only visible signs of the tram crash are the many bouquets of flowers near the site of the accident. But the work has only just begun for the accident investigators, and I would like to wish them well in putting in place measures to ensure this never happens again. I would also like to pay tribute to the families who have lost loved ones or those that have been injured. I hope they are able to come to terms with this tragedy and cherish happy memories of those that were lost. I urge this Council to provide whatever assistance they need. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pollard. Councillor Oliver Lewis, I call on you to speak.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As we have heard this evening, on the 9th of November, many men and women from across New Addington and other parts of Croydon went to work on the tram. They rose early and caught the tram before 6 a.m. because they are hard workers from a community that knows about hard work. Tragically, the tram derailed and they didn't make it to work. Some will never return home and others' lives will be changed forever. Tonight we remember all of those involved and their loved ones. Many men and women from the emergency services also went to work, and they worked hard for the people on that tram in the wind and the rain and the gloom. Despite years of service, they describe one of the hardest incidents they have attended. They are hard workers, and tonight we thank them with our eternal gratitude for their efforts that saved many. As has been mentioned tonight, this Council's response has been to work together with its partners to support those affected and to remember those who we have lost, because this is a Council that works together with others. The community too, those who were not on the tram that awful morning, also went to work. They have done what they can to support and comfort those affected, because New Addington is a community that works together. I'm glad that some representatives of the community can join us here this evening. Indeed, this tragedy has brought everyone together in solidarity, and the community response has been fantastic. Churches packed to pay their respects. Flowers aplenty on Central Parade. Many donations to the support fund. Pages filled in books of condolences. Whether it's for the Crystal Palace fans that we have lost, or for the Polish mother who will never see her kids again, or the Portuguese family who are traumatised by their experiences, we know that New Addington is a community that works together and will be there for those in need. And I also want to thank you too, Mr Mayor, for all you have done in your role to support and lead this community response in New Addington and across the borough. Whilst the events are still raw for many of us, we will in time want answers to this awful tragedy, why it occurred, what we can do to learn from it and ensure that it never happens again. We must all continue to work together to ensure that those involved are fittingly remembered and never forgotten. We must continue to get the answers that we need and bring some small degree of comfort to those affected. Right now, our thoughts and prayers will remain with the people who are affected by this awful tragedy and their loved ones. But as a representative of New Addington, I'm proud to represent that community because of the fantastic community response we have seen and because we know it is a hard-working community that works together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Sarah Bashford.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. At about 6:50 on that morning, my son phoned home, spoke to his sister and told her she might have a problem getting to Croydon and then to work as a tram had come off the tracks. We didn't know at that stage the horror that had unfolded, and as very little was on the news, we assumed it was a minor derailment. I left for work and took what I thought would be a quicker route to avoid backed-up traffic. An hour and a half later, I reached my office. For those who aren't aware, I work in Gavin Barwell's constituency office. During that journey, I received a call from Gavin, who'd arrived at the crash site and told me to cancel his meetings as the situation was awful and had to take priority. During that day, I received many calls from residents who were shocked and upset and were also extremely cross that the BBC felt repeating coverage of the Trump victory was more important than a significant national incident. Gavin received many emails from those who wanted to express their condolences and offer support, but also from people who wanted to share experience that they'd had on the tram prior to the accident. It was very worrying to read them, but we were able to pass them to the right place to be considered in the investigation. I know it's also worried many people who have been surprised at the lack of safety features on the tram. As time went on, the names of the victims came into the public domain, and when I heard the first one and realised he was near to the same age as my son, who also gets the tram on a daily basis, but from Sandylands, I felt sick but fortunate knowing my son was alive. Like everyone else, my thoughts were with the families who were trying to find out if their loved ones were alive or injured, knowing that some would not hear the door open that evening as normal and say hello to the ones they loved. I can't imagine how awful that would be. As the situation progressed, it became clear that the media were making the lives of those who were grieving a misery, and Gavin tweeted them to ask them to give consideration to the families who were distressed and in shock. Since this, Gavin and I have met with bereaved families and those who were injured. I can only say how much respect I have for the dignified way they have acted in such terrible circumstances. I've also heard stories of great friendship and understanding that made me realise how lucky we are to live in the community of Croydon. We came together to show respect and grieve for those we didn't personally know but felt the loss of. I went to lay flowers at Clyde Road with my daughter and her boyfriend, something they and I have never done before. And whilst there was great sadness, everyone there felt a bond, and I'd like to thank the street pastors who were there to offer comfort and stop those who went on their own feeling alone. This incident has affected so many people in so many ways, and some people's lives will never be the same again. But what I have seen is compassion, kindness, strength and resilience. This is Croydon, and I am proud to be part of it. I'd like to offer my condolences and deepest sympathy to those who have lost their loved ones, and my sincere best wishes for the speedy recovery of those who've been injured. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bashford. That now concludes the Extraordinary Council meeting. There'll be a 10-minute break, after which the Ordinary Council meeting will start. Thank you very much.